The first time Gar looked at me, I was carrying a crate of atmospheric sealant across the loading apron in a light rain, and I dropped it. Not from fear, I just fumbled it. The corner caught my knee, the crate went down, and I swore quietly and picked it up again. When I straightened, the Alpha was sitting 40 meters away at the edge of the perimeter wire, watching me the way a dog watches something it hasn't decided about yet. Bigger than a dog, shoulder height when it stood, coal-black fur with a faint iridescent edge that caught the depot's light, and eyes that were very old and very yellow. I looked back at it for a moment, then finished carrying the crate inside. That was my third day at Way Station Drell. The garrison before me had lasted 11 weeks before requesting reassignment, all 4 of them. The debrief note said the veth-pack had made the perimeter untenable, meaning the pack ran the wire at night, got into the auxiliary storage, and the garrison had spent every shift watching the shadows. No attacks on personnel. But by week 11, nobody was sleeping. Command sent me because I was the sergeant they had available and Drell needed a supply custodian, not a fighting unit. I was 54 years old. I had a bad knee and an adequate coffee ration, and no particular opinions about veth-packs one way or another. I set up my bunk, logged my inventory, and went to work. Gar was at the wire again the next morning, and the morning after that. By the end of the first week I had stopped registering it. A predator watching me do inventory checks was less interesting than whether the coolant coupling on junction 3 needed replacing. It did. I replaced it. The first cub came on the 14th day. I found it in the auxiliary storage, sitting on top of a sealed container of field rations, looking at me with the same flat assessment Gar used. It was the size of a large cat, all paws and ears, and its fur was the same coal-black but without the adult sheen, matte, like something that hadn't quite finished becoming itself. I stood in the doorway for a moment. "That's a pressurized container," I told it. "Don't scratch the seal." It blinked. I went around it, logged what I'd come for, and left. When I came back an hour later, it was gone. It was there again the following morning, and the one after that. By the third week there were 2 of them, and they had moved from the storage containers to the floor beside my desk, and I had stopped stepping around them. You step around a thing long enough, you teach yourself the wrong shape of the room. I learned their shape instead. I named them Cord and Jess because they had roughly those personalities. Cord was restless and got into things, Jess was still and watched. The names weren't meant to stick. They stuck anyway. Gar appeared inside the perimeter on the 22nd day. Not aggressively, just appeared, the way large things sometimes do, without a sound that registered until you noticed the displacement in the air. I was running the morning diagnostic on the relay array, and I turned and it was there, 6 meters away, sitting. I nodded at it. I went back to the diagnostic. When I finished and turned to head inside, Gar fell into step 3 meters behind me. Not crowding, not hurting, just accompanying. I walked my usual circuit of the depot, junction 3, the fuel cell rack, the signal repeater on the east wall, and Gar walked it with me, and when I went inside it sat at the door. That was how mornings worked from then on. A supply shuttle came in on day 31, 2-man crew out of the Drell waypoint. They landed, saw Gar at the door, and refused to exit the craft until I came out to stand next to it. Even then, one of them kept his hand near his sidearm the whole time he was offloading. "You tamed it," the pilot said. "No," I said. "Then what is it doing?" I thought about that, standing next to me, I suppose. The pilot looked at Gar. Gar looked at the pilot with those yellow eyes, and the pilot looked away first and finished offloading faster than any shuttle crew I'd ever seen. They were back in the air inside 20 minutes. By day 40, the full pack was sleeping in the depot. Not in my bunk. Cord and Jess had that territory, and they defended it with a low sound that the other 4 respected, which told me something about how cub privilege worked in Veth's social structure. The others arranged themselves in the main corridor and the relay room, and once, memorably, in the supply office with their legs in the air like dogs who had forgotten they were predators. Gar slept across the doorway to the outside, and I learned to step over it in the dark without thinking. 4 years of this. Shuttle crews got used to it. The occasional inspector who came through Drell would file a note about non-standard fauna and leave. Nobody ordered me to remove the pack because nobody had a regulation that covered it, and nobody wanted to be the person who tried. The scouts arrived on a Tuesday, which I only knew because I marked my calendar to keep track of resupply cycles. 3 of them, unmarked shuttle, which was the first thing wrong, private registry, which was the second. They came down at the auxiliary pad without filing an approach signal, which was the third. I had the manifest open on my screen, and I watched them cross the apron on the camera feed, the way you watch something that hasn't decided what it is yet. They were assessing the place. I could see it in the way they walked, measuring sight lines, checking the storage dimensions, nodding the relay infrastructure. One of them took photographs. These were men who wanted to know whether Drell could be taken over quietly and used for something else, and the answer to that question, for people like them, was always eventually yes. I was in the supply office. The pack was distributed through the depot in their usual places. Gar was, as always, at the main door. The lead scout reached the door first, and then he stopped. I watched it on the feed. He looked at Gar. Gar looked at him. The 2 behind him came up and then also stopped. 30 seconds of nobody moving. Then the lead man said something to the others. I couldn't hear it through the feed, and he reached for the door handle. Gar stood up. Just that. Stood up and looked at him from a height that put those yellow eyes level with the man's throat. I came out of the supply office and walked down the corridor. Cord and Jess fell in on either side of me without being asked, which they had taken to doing lately, and the other 4 materialized from wherever they'd been resting. By the time I reached the door, the whole pack was with me. I opened it. The 3 scouts were in a configuration I'd describe as not comfortable. Gar hadn't moved. It was simply standing in the doorway being what it was, which was 140 kilos of apex predator with old yellow eyes and patience that made me feel young. "Help you with something," I said. The lead man looked at me. He had the kind of face that was used to being the most dangerous person in a room, and he was recalibrating. "Just a navigational stop," he said, "checking charts." "Charts aren't kept here," I said. "Drell is a supply custodian station. What you want is the waypoint relay at Sector 11. He looked at Gar. Gar looked at him. "Right," he said. They left. All 3 of them turned and walked back toward their shuttle, which I considered the sensible choice. I watched on the feed until they were off the apron. Later that afternoon, I noticed one of the scouts had left something behind near the auxiliary pad. I won't describe it in detail, only that it was a part of him he would have preferred to keep. The pack had been thorough and quiet about it, the way they were thorough and quiet about everything, and I filed no report because there was nothing in the supply custodian regulations that covered it. That evening I sat in the doorway and Gar came and lay down with its head across my feet, which was new. It had never done that before. Cord and Jess draped themselves across my lap in the proprietary way they had developed over 4 years of deciding I was theirs, and the rest of the pack settled around us in the cooling dark. I hadn't tried to earn any of it. I'd carried crates and replaced a coupling and walked my circuit and stepped over a large predator in the dark every morning for 4 years, and apparently that was enough. I scratched behind Gar's ear, which it tolerated the way it tolerated most things I did, with stillness, and those old eyes half closed, and the low subsonic sound that wasn't quite a purr but was the closest word I had for it. The stars came out over Waystation Drell. "Good pack," I said. Nobody argued.